The first part of this stream is probably going to be more silent as we wait for people to drift in. We'll probably be discussing similar things to last week, mostly about throws in matchups and specific spacings you want to stand at, which was in itself a segue from the idea of just blocking until you feel like you understand your opponent's stuff. Last week we didn't really have any very off-the-wall or unfamiliar characters for very long.
Are you here to take me out?
So we did stay mostly in talking about those options. This week we don't know who will show up, but since we don't normally get more people until later on, and most people don't tend to stick around as long in loser stays on lounges, we'll see what happens there. This is, in that case, a loser stays on lounge. It is basically Atlantic Rim, anywhere in eastern the US or Canada, certain parts of Europe if your internet is good, Latin America, Caribbean islands, all down there. You can expect that you'll probably have at least a decent connection to most of the players in the lounge. Once you start getting toward the Midwest or further down into South America and similar, maybe not so much, especially if you are on Wi-Fi or your internet is generally not as good overall. But we don't mind if you come in and give it a try. So far, for DoA6, we found that generally giving it a try is not much help. If you have a reason to doubt it, then more likely it does not work well. If you figure it should work and it acts a little weird, don't worry about that. We will probably at least be willing to check out why that might be and whether or not you could probably have matches with someone else in the same lounge, because we are fairly spread out ourselves. You might be far away from a specific player. We're also a little bit underconfident that these will stand out. We had some problems with the stream before. We'll let you know on Twitter at 2_MK_FGC if anything like that happens, and we're either unable to continue the stream or need a certain amount of time beyond just like mentioning it in stream chat or something to bring it back up. So with all that said, please feel free to join us. Look for the loser stays on 2MK lobby if you want to. And expect that there will be probably something said if you come and play a character that is not normally in the stream, with the normal characters being basically Kazumi, Nico, Ayane, Hanuka, Helena, Bayman, Meifang, and I guess Elliot.
don't have time to play games with you.
Are you here to take me out?
Fight! Get ready! Fight! Get ready! Fight!
Go home.
All right. I will do my best.
I don't have time to play games with you. time to play games with you.
Fight!
Look it in the way!
Get ready! Fight!
I have you now!
Get ready! Fight!
Are you ready?
Get ready! Fight!
Oh dear. What happened to all that spirit you had a moment ago? Let's see how strong you are.
Are you here to take me out?
Get ready! Fight! Get ready. Fight! Get ready. Fight!
You were acting all tough at the beginning. What happened? I don't have time to play games with you.
All right.
Fight! Get ready. Fight! Get ready. Fight! Get ready. Fight!
Were you here to take me out?
I cannot.
Fight! Get ready! Fight! Get ready! Fight! Get ready! Fight!
Goodness.
Sorry, miss. This is my job.
No way. I don't have time to play games with you.
Fight!
Yeah!
Get ready. Fight! Get ready. Fight! Get ready. Fight!
Don't make me laugh.
I'm giving this all I got.
I don't hold back when I fight.
Get ready. Fight!
Watch out!
Rig is another character where the obvious thing is to hold mid kick if you're going to be holding mid at all. This isn't necessarily more difficult than anything else. It can be hard to remember that most sweeping style moves or impact style moves, especially kicks in this game, are in fact mid kicks rather than high ones. If the opponent has jumped or like done an axe kick, it's a good chance it's not a high kick. Rig is one of the characters where often you have to care because there is a high kick coming. It's usually the second hit, meaning that if you block one thing from him at all, you should just hold high kick right after. You can hold high in general because he doesn't tend to do a lot of damage with many of his follow-up lows, and even the mids that will catch you are not that big a deal. For most of us, moving from just blocking to high hold is relatively easy, but it is entirely possible that you will mess it up. One of the reasons why kick characters in this game are slightly stronger as a result of this is simply that you attempt to move from back, just holding back to block mids, to up back hold to catch the high. But your failure condition is that you will end up doing mid-hold, mid-back hold. This means that kick characters have a tiny chance based on a player's execution of being more effective. When you mess up the movement to the hold, even if your timing was right, a punch character using mid-punches will most likely get held. A kick character does not get held, and often they just get to continue. Fortunately, most kick characters are not so close that this matters, and it's not usually the second hit that's a high kick, making Rig a little bit unique in that regard. There are a couple, but I think overall you'd have to say there were like 3 of them. Characters who go from a mid-punch or even a mid-kick that you block straight to a high kick, and also have the option to go for mid kick and all the other little problems they can get. There are not a lot of them, and most of the time the moves are not particularly ambiguous when they are.
Are you here to take me out?
Alright then, let's go.
Fight!
Is that all you got? Come back when you're strong enough to matter.
One good way to learn to time these things has to do with the way that the human brain connects together pieces of information. If you knew that an attack was coming, and you did not intend to counterattack it, the easier answer to holding the attack is actually to tap back twice, which will, if there is no attack, cause you to backdash. If you're expecting like a long range kick or similar, it will cause you to backdash out of it. Your opponent probably won't do anything much. And if they are doing a longer combo, the fact that the first hit whiffs doesn't usually mean in this game that the combo string doesn't continue, because special moves in this game are basically you press the button X number of times, you press punch 3 times, and your character will go through the entire motions of the 3 punch combo, regardless of whether or not that has actually hit your opponent. This means that if you expect to be attacked with a mid-kick, and you, let's say, attempt a backdash, you end up blocking, and your whole concept is, well, this character does mid-kicks into high kicks. So you do back, up, back, hold, back again,
Alright then, let's go.
and the result should normally be that you end up holding the high kick if there is one. It is just generally what works. You don't have to think too hard about why this happens. You also get to learn about the backdash spacing and to keep your own spacing pretty optimal without doing too much of that. This is also a good timing and understanding for how to get certain throws done. If you think you're going to need to punish the opponent, and you're expecting them to either whiff or stop their attack, or maybe even that you need to tech a throw, but in this game, teching the throw does not work as well with this method. In other games, this is like one of the first things you learn. In this game, not so much. You simply press the same thing. Back, usually forward and throw, just to make sure that you didn't press incorrectly. And it resolves your problem. The key is really to get used to it not as, I must watch for this thing happening, wait for the second part, and then do another thing, because we tend to mess up the timing when we do that. Little bits of underconfidence, little bits of confusion, even things like lag, as you're about to see here, cause those types of problems, because you can't see in the lag to know what's supposed to happen. But if you had a feeling, if you knew you were taking this as a read, then you don't really care. It's also a good way to get yourself out of the mental state of attacking to solve your problems, because you've defaulted to, okay, I am not certain what to do, I've tapped back twice. If you realize that that seems to work out for you quote-unquote too often, and your opponent doesn't do anything, then you have a better understanding of the spacing, and normally, tapping back twice in this game doesn't necessarily mean you won't block. Different games have different levels of leniency in how long you have to be holding back, exactly where in that your opponent's strike has to hit. But a thing, proximity blocking, works in a very strange way in certain games, and this is one of them. If you've pressed block, or rather pressed back, with your opponent's move incoming at you at the right time, even before the move has hit you, you have activated what we call proximity blocking. In 3D games, this usually means that unless you have released the button for a significant period of time, you keep blocking anyway. This is usually because the timing of the move about to make contact is around the same amount of time that it takes for you to let go and tap again. In other games this is less true, mostly because the moves are faster. But the gap between expecting a move and that move making contact with your character is different in 3D games in general. There are other games where the animations are slow enough that this functions. In faster games you have usually high-low mix-ups and fuzzy guard, and you're usually trying to have issues of making sure your opponent doesn't get you opened up in any tricky ways. But in this case, it doesn't really matter that way, because when you do get hit by lows, it's not usually devastating. Or the lows that do hit in this devastating way tend to be a little bit more telegraphed. So you could do similar things. You could be in the same situation, back, down, hold, because that's what you expect to be coming. And this works best of all when you are already being hit. If you were already blocking, releasing the button to do the taps doesn't necessarily lead to you ending your block. And since the delay between the moves is so long, most of us can actually input or fiddly attempt to input the back during being hit, and that will automatically time most of your follow-up holds for you, as opposed to calmly waiting there and thinking, okay, their move is coming at this time. Just let your hands time your response for you. Especially because, like nearly everything else, if you've learned the timing, it will just stick with you, and if you haven't, your body will over time learn to do it. Physically. It will remember physically how to do something, and that is important in fighting games, because thinking about how long you need in order to do a move, especially when that move is only one button, trying to figure out the right timing for it, and make sure you can recreate that timing every time you pick up the game, is much harder than learning physically how fast you need to tap to have something happen correctly, and then you just never get it wrong again. Even if it's different per character, your body will often still remember this. If you've played any other fighting games and gotten used to a character's block stun and how to punish a move, you know the pain that you suffer when a new character appears with different block stun. In those games you normally don't need to do this. The timing is a bit faster, but learning to press something on reaction for this is much harder no matter what you do. This again has nothing to do with neutral. If you want to hold in neutral the very first hit, you're fine. You don't have to think about that at all. If you are trying to get holds as particularly high or low holds out while you are being comboed, even if you start to defend correctly, is much different. So do at least try to bear this in mind when you are learning to hold from a defensive position. Learning to hold from the spot where you have already either needed to block or know you're about to need to block.
Get ready. Fight! Get ready. Fight!
Are you ready?
Interestingly, you can also use this in the same way that you do meaties for other people's wake-up. Since a lot of this game is about understanding how your opponent will attempt to get up, including their options for wake-up low kick and wake-up mid kick, you can learn to do similar things. Figure out approximately when you think your opponent is going to do something. Tap back at least once, if not twice. This is usually at the beginning of their animation for getting up. And you'll be able to see some weird interactions. As soon as you see them, basically their character try to start getting up, double tap your back and see what happens.
Get ready. Fight!
This is particularly true if you are a player whose combos leave you really close to your opponent after you finish them, or if you're the sort of player who tends to run right up to your opponent in order to maintain pressure once you have gotten the knockdown. If you do either of those things, it's much more sensible because your opponent then can't react to you moving forward with any option.
Sorry I missed your lovely singing.
Many players can and will respond to your action at the last moment before they get up. Their character is already down. They don't need to measure spacing or do anything. They can focus entirely on your character and use only timing. To them, it's literally just react with a guess to this thing. All of us have played games like that. There's basically all video games are pretty much that. These days, there's some that are more so motion, obviously, but you know, back in the days when we used to play with just things that were joystick and buttons, you moved your character or whatever to a specific spot, you waited until something happened, and you hit a button at the moment you needed the thing to happen. Sometimes you are holding the direction forward, so you jump, but in the end it's the same thing. You press a button at a specific timing because you saw something on the screen. Meaning that it's much easier to do that when you are playing defensively. When you think about how can I get in on my opponent who is downed, you are now trying to predict what they will do, but not only predict it, also have the correct reaction on the correct timing. So you can use this to reprogram your physical reaction, the same way you learn to do your meaties at the right timing in other games, or how to air dash in Guilty Gear, or even similar things. And if you're the type that tends to go in on other people's wake up too often, managing to get yourself to think in terms of double tapping back, just connecting that idea to your opponent being knocked down, technically it will prevent you from going in all of the time. You just have to work on the fact that sometimes, oh wait, I forgot to move in before I thought about this. But even then, it doesn't matter if you actually do it or not. It's only if you think to yourself, oh, I should move in quickly now and then do the whole thing. But that's something you can work on. That's something you can recognize as an interaction you're having in the game a lot more easily than every time you run up and then try to guess not only what your opponent will do, but the timing you need to use to stop it. One of the things you end up learning against our Kasumi bot that also comes in handy against Helena, despite the fact that we didn't really make Helena bot around this, we'll get into why that is later, is the idea of knowing that you have a character that your opponent will aim to whiff punish that could be considered easy to whiff punish, and learning what your opponent's most likely choice of whiff punish will be, so that if they're slow, you can automatically hold that move. For characters like Helena, and to some extent Kasumi, this is important because the range that these characters end up at after attempting to keep the opponent out with a high kick or moving attack tends to be a spacing where the opponent has a very limited set of options. Other characters, when you're getting under pressure and you mess up, you might get grabbed. You might get grabbed with a long grab or just a confident movement into a grab because moving forward is slightly faster and easier than moving backward, and so on. But those things don't really apply as much to long range kick characters, particularly ones with good mid kicks. They swing with the kick, you aren't really super able to get them in any other way than an forward moving or extended strike of your own. This often works well because you were somewhat expecting the kick, but if you are slightly slow, particularly because many of these moves take a while to animate fully to reach their target, there's no downside to the other player, usually, in just going for the hold, because they have to wait for their move to finish animating anyway. They get to watch what you're doing. And chances are, if they went for the hold and they had a good timing for that, either they got hit because you whiff punished them so quickly that it didn't matter, and for many characters this actually sends them flying or doesn't let you get your combo anyway.
I cannot lose this fight.
Or if you were slightly slow due to trying it really hard, they end up holding you. You'd think that the obvious response is, well, I shouldn't let them hold you, I would just not do anything, but that's what they want, because now you've given up with punishing against a character where that's the primary way that you get to deal with their neutral. So holding you at that point even once can be enough to discourage you from challenging their kicks. And if they can discourage you from that, it means a lot of other options open up for them. There are other things and other moves you can do with the same perspective, but because most of the time when an advancing move is done, a hurt box is still extended for quite some time, and the character doesn't tend to move backward out of the way of throw even if the opponent was interested in hitting buttons. They don't have the same level of impetus to go, okay, I need to hit something here, and it needs to be this thing, otherwise I'm not going to reach, otherwise it's not going to matter. As players get better, there are more options, more likely to make different choices in the same situations, maybe sidestep out of certain moves, but there will always be characters whose moves are good for tracking, hit fairly far. Helena in particular has like a swinging kick that tends to put her facing backward, I believe, far enough away from you that you didn't really get to do anything other than hit her. And she's not likely to need to continue her combo there. So, if you do have the timing to actually hit her, good. If you try it anyway and she ends up blocking, this is also often good for you. But the moment she gets into the mindset that she can hold your counterattack or your attempted whiff punish, you're going to be in trouble. The answer to this, from the side of the player who wants to do the whiff punish, is simply to add another layer, to risk going in or sidestepping or taking that moment of whiff punish rather than, okay, let me hit you, how can I move around the stage to get myself a better advantage? This depends on your character entirely, just bear it in mind because sometimes if your own character doesn't have a lot of methods of moving in quickly for either a delayed whiff punish or a regular one, if you realize my character has limited options, every time Helena does this kick, the only thing I can think of to do is hit my own mid-kick. You might need to play your character a little bit more positionally instead of trying to whiff punish her, despite the fact that we constantly say that she's a character you should be aiming to whiff punish.
Alright then, let's go.
I'll end this quickly.
But that brings us back to the discussion of holding rig kicks as a generality. You can see it just watching him here. The first kick can be a mid, you can't be sure. If it's a high, there's probably nothing following it. He does have the mid punch, but the mid punch isn't really terrifying to you. So the question is simply, am I expecting this move? Even when he does manage to land a low or something else, there's a good chance that what's following that is a high kick too, because he's just that sort of character. Even if you were to do this incorrectly and make it so that when you see the high kick, you still hold high, this isn't necessarily wrong, because the high hold in this game covers both high punch and high kick, meaning that if Rig decides to put more pressure on you by going for his fastest options, specifically the high punches, you still end up holding the attack. Now, the actual gameplay and game plan for this matchup is completely separate from this. This has more to do with what happens when Rig feels the need to hit buttons or feels the option to get pressure. You can see that the gameplay itself doesn't have anything to do with that. It's Bayman's judgment mostly about when to press offense himself and how to get a hit on Rig at max range that doesn't involve extending himself too much. But if Rig ends up in an advantage situation due to Bayman making a mistake, his good options, combo-wise, are kind of limited. He ends up doing a lot of throw stuff in order to resolve the problem, simply for this reason. He's not the most dynamic of characters. He's more so one who tends to put the opponent on the back foot a lot, constantly pushing them to react.
Is that all you got? Come back when you're strong enough to matter.
And then using the space that you get when people think, okay, I am better off playing this match reactively. Because eventually if you get good enough at pressure, even if your opponent learns to hold you, the response they will generally have is, you know what, I should probably just play reactively, I should wait for you to hit buttons, and then grab you, then hold them. That is still a benefit to Rig. Getting into that mental state of, I am just going to play reactively, that is what opens up so many options for the character. Understanding this from Rig's perspective means that he gets to go for more lows, but you don't often want to do specifically that. You want to make the opponent nervous in some way at an extended spacing. Once you've managed to make them nervous, you can obviously just decide, am I hitting buttons or not? A person who is constantly on edge because they have to make sure they hold correctly every time you choose to hit a button, even if they block, is not going to be as ready for throws, for lows, for you repositioning to get a better advantage, because they're not thinking about how to hit you anymore. They're thinking about how to stop you. And most people are not good at switching between those two things or naturally flowing from one to the other. A few masters can keep both things in mind at the same time,
I don't hold back
but
in a fight.
mastery is a thing you learn through going through these steps. In that sense, Ayane often has a very similar style, making this matchup kind of odd, since they both have to get to that point of seeing this either long move or long idea from the opponent and holding that almost perfectly. From there, we then tend to move into dancing around in neutral, going for throws, trying to mislead the opponent with one move that looks like a different move. See if you can get them to hit buttons that you expect to keep you out of a certain position. All of these things become important. But you can definitely see here that both players mostly are aiming to get to their preferred range and do some move. But the move is usually telegraphed enough that you could, if you had enough practice at it, just hold it. Ayane has some advantage because she has the better throw game. And because, once again, if you see a swinging or a spinning move, such as most of what she likes to do, it's often surprising to recognize, wait, that's a mid-kick, I have to hold forward, not high. Rig is also able to have some advantage here though, in that he's one of the few characters that whiff punishes Ayane really well. This is because of the way she staggers once she is hit out of most moves. You can see that most of Ayane's moves, despite actually taking up a lot of space in front of her, also carry her forward at least a little bit. This doesn't mean that she can easily be whiff punished by anyone in the cast. In fact, often you manage the whiff punish but don't get a lot of damage out of it. Rig also has a lot of forward momentum in certain combos, and those combos get to start with kicks. This is one of the things that is hard to understand about why kicks are good in fighting games, and why they wouldn't be so good in real martial arts most of the time, but you could still see when this happens occasionally in heavy contact real martial arts, or even martial sports. If you watch actual Taekwondo, a lot of the ring out style things come from this. The opponent does not stand there and get hit by a combo as they do in a fighting game, but in order to avoid it, they often need to try to sidestep or backstep, and they might not make it out of range if the initial hit was good. Or they will make it out of range and just ring themselves out anyway, so you still win. This game would be, for example, extremely different if they had any ring out stages at all.
Hey, get up. Huh? You're done already?
So as a rig player, understand that you are able to whiff punish people who extend themselves forward because you have enough momentum. You just have to know which are the right combos for doing this. You get a little more damage from your whiff punishes and tagged stray hits than most other characters get. Even Kasumi, who is good at playing this sort of game, does it more so by breaking your expectation and managing to either get a knockdown or a mix-up. She doesn't tend to get a full combo. You can punish her, you can get out and not have to worry about it. It is not a situation where she just does what she wants and then it's neutral and then it's over. Phase 4 being somewhere in between the two. She has maybe one combo and you have to be very careful about which combo you use, but sometimes can't actually make the conversion at all because of whatever her first strike was.
last chance to run away.
And once again, we get to one of the main reasons why we even have these lounges, to train context switching. If you know a matchup, but aren't confident enough, switching from the things you needed to do in your last matchup can be a little bit confusing. We can see that with Honoka because Honoka is, again, a character who can deal with Ayane, but she does it entirely differently. She has throws that have good damage, and 2 ways out of a specific thing Ayane wants to do at close range that make the throws less of a bad idea, so to speak. Basically, if your character has weak throws to whiff punish with, or bad situations that come out of their throws, let's say they throw the opponent too far away, they don't get any pressure, they don't get any mix-ups, what often happens is that you at least sometimes want to hit buttons. That makes sense. But a Honoka player is never obligated to hit buttons. She starts to hit buttons when she realizes, oh, this opponent is not getting thrown. They're doing something, they're blocking. But since it's almost always a whiff punish or punish situation, it's seldom Honoka that's in danger, and she does have enough good close range punish moves that you won't necessarily know whether or not she's going for mid punch, high punch, throw, or even mid kick sometimes. She also has fairly good high kicks if you want. You can't say, I'm going to go in on this character and get to this range, and from there I'm then going to hold. Because Honoka's stuff all leads into decent combos, you don't get to decide to just do this with low risk. There are a few characters where if you said, I'm going to hold your most dangerous move and then I'll be fine. She's not the character that you can do this to. Maybe at a really high level where you're so used to taking massive damage from Honoka that you still have a preferred idea of which move actually does the most damage, which ones you care about because of position. But at this point, making that decision is relatively hard. Ayane is therefore better off in this matchup, aiming primarily for moves that have high pushback, or in some way make it difficult for Honoka to get that throw after. The problem is that Ayane honestly doesn't have a lot of moves like that. She's normally built as a character who is meant to win by outpacing you in some way, and it's hard to outpace Honoka entirely because she has too many strong frontal offense tools. If you try to get too far away from her and then approach, she will literally just punch you. Ayane is unfortunately one of those characters who does have trouble with punishing Helena in ways that Helena can't hold. She does have a large benefit though in that she has enough evasive moves and other concepts that she can use from there that honestly one of her better options after Helena has whiffed a move in neutral is to stand there and wait for the next one. Helena doesn't really benefit from just whiffing moves in neutral in front of someone all day after all, and she doesn't have too much benefit from movement after those buttons. She gets to play a very slow game in which she doesn't have to do anything much, and then can flow for a long time. A very comfortable thing for the type of player that likes to play Helena, but the core to remember is that it's not that threatening to you. You do not have to be afraid of the character unless your opponent is able to make you uncomfortable to the point where you don't know what to do. This seems to be kind of laggy. We've been looking into the fact that, you know, as things get worse and worse in the world, worse being very operative word at this point, the difficulty of keeping good internet connection seems to be going up. Not for everyone, not for all the ways you serve information, but definitely just more strain on a lot of things. So it's possible that the lag for Cynthia is higher tonight than usual. This is similar to actually how we described how a player should often fight Vega, but the Helena players are a little bit more sedate about it. When we're playing Street Fighter V, we generally say, when you're fighting Vega, and the Vega player has whiffed a button, expect another one, because they usually expect slide or something even less safe, because they won't be able to reach anymore. Vega players don't like whiffing buttons. They want to hit you, and they will try to hit you again after whiffing. Helena will generally try a bit less. She takes a little while, she sometimes takes a break between attacks in order to get this done. But if that's so, you don't necessarily get to do your own counterattack. From the other side, Helena doesn't get to stand there and do nothing, because if she constantly did that, then you would get your counterattack. That's the general reason this works out. Helena knows that you are probably going to counterattack if she pauses for too long, and she gets out of your counterattacks by doing a move of her own again. One that beats it or goes past it, but none of her moves are quite fast enough to do this without either perfect reactions or some form of read. It's just that she could go, well, I think you're coming at my head, I have a move that doesn't extend my hurt box much and dodges lows, so the only way I would lose here is if you did a really fast mid. So I'm just going to do that move, because that's your character. I'm fine. You could obviously aim for that really fast mid as the player fighting her, or you could do nothing and wait for her to do that move and whiff punish that, because that move is more whiff punishable than the first one she uses. It's a basic sequence that, regardless of how many times it happens, there's not a whole lot of good options to avoid it. Helena does a move, you probably can't whiff punish that move because you're playing Ayane and don't have quite the reach, or don't have quite the speed, because your longer moves are slow. You could go for something middling, and if you do, she'll have to block, she'll get into your pressure. She doesn't want that, so she hits another button. That button is more punishable, and therefore now you have her. Often this is about reading your opponent's emotions or their stress level to know when to hold back and when to move forward.
Are you here to take me out?
If you're particularly good at that, then what you often need is the understanding of these pieces to know when to do particular things. But we are back to rig and the effectiveness of rig lows. You can definitely see how rig does get a lot out of this, but still ends up having to kind of poke the opponent to death. It takes a really long time to do a lot of damage. The bigger problem with this style is that eventually the opponent realizes, oh, right, as much as this would be risky normally to be thinking of a fight in which I generally attempt to hold lows, I could do that here. And the reason you can do it here is because if you are crouching at the moment you try to hold the low, and a high is done, most of the time the high doesn't hit you either.
Get ready. Fight!
If your character's holds are very strong or put them in really good situations, this is your go-to game plan. Because, simply put, you will outdamage Rig heavily enough that it's fine. The Rig player has to at some point make a guess, and as you can see, this is like we're at nearly 7 interactions to win that round.
Get ready.
It's not a minor amount of work, is all I'm saying.
Get ready. Fight!
You can see the interaction there. Now, this often doesn't help you a lot because Rig does eventually go into a mid-kick for most things, or a mid-punch that's kind of a problem. But sometimes it's even worse for them because you can do the low hold, and based on the delay, do the mid hold, and be fine. Again, this is not really something I'm strongly suggesting because you can't know when the timing is. You would have to more so do your mid hold because your low hold whiffed entirely. Not the best of ideas in normal situations. And hard to recognize, honestly, even though you're used to this as a straight up attack, you can't always do it.
On to the next fight.
This is one of the situations where the thing I mentioned earlier in the stream of being able to double tap a button or set up a timing by doing something else physical doesn't work. Because you would have to time where your opponent's first attack was rather than the incoming one. When you're blocking, you get a feel for block stun. You don't generally get a feel for whiffing as easily, and you definitely don't get a feel for whiffing a move that you weren't expecting. Or rather, in this case, you whiffed a hold because your opponent did a move that went over your head, but Rig has like 3 of those, so you can't necessarily identify in time which one it was to know whether or not you should go for the mid hold. Or, let's assume that Rig does press the mid punch every time, and all of the moves in question can follow into the mid punch. Each of them recovers differently, so there's still no way to absolutely time it. Even the fact that they recover differently might mean that a less mashy player could themselves have a different timing for it. So there are situations in which this doesn't help, mostly with characters who have variable time in their combo strings, or when they are whiffing moves at very close range and you can't be sure whether or not the next one is going to be a problem. This is one of the helpful aspects of high moves because they're generally not that strong. They get blocked high and ducked, but if they are crouched under, it's a little bit complicated to figure out how to stop the player right after because they tend to have more options.
All right. I will do my best.
Are you here to take me out?
Fight!
We are now at the point where you can probably expect silence until the closeout of this stream. We're going to see some grappler versus grappler matchups, and mostly things that would be repetitions of what were mentioned before, or attempts at application by the players who are still in the lounge. Tonight, due to both the lag and one or two other things that are planned, it's unlikely that we're going to be continuing too long after stream end, even if someone joins now. So basically, you're not going to get matches most likely if you join us tonight. We are probably closing up in about 20 minutes, if that long, and at that point, this lounge will almost certainly end as well.
I cannot lose this fight.
Are you here to take me out?
Are you ready? Yes, this is the melody.
All right. I will do my best.
All right then, let's go.
Fight!
You're off.
Get ready! Fight! Get ready! Fight! Get ready! Fight!
Promise me, you won't tell anyone.
I don't have time to play games with you.
I don't hold back when I fight.
Are you ready?
Get ready. Fight!
What happened to all that spirit you had a moment ago?
I'll end this quickly.
I don't hold back when I fight.
Alright, we are now into our last match of the night. I normally say on stream. No, just last match of the night. We're done after this. As far as I've seen, there was no options for any free characters just yet. There's probably an announcement somewhere that I should have checked by now but didn't. But given that the announcement itself doesn't really change anything, and the fact that we would have needed the whole week to develop any bot anyway, there won't be one tomorrow. Tomorrow should just be nothing. We're probably not streaming at all. If for some reason we come up with something to stream, you will almost certainly find it at 2_MK_FGC, our Twitter account, where we generally announce if we are doing that sort of thing, but most likely we wouldn't announce it until 7 PM anyway. This is Eastern time, of course. Next Monday will be another Mishmashing Battle Lounge. I think we are probably at the point where we'll be having another Mix and Mash in order to get more experience for people, but we are not absolutely sure because it does depend on who's available at that time. If we have less players than usual, Mix and Mash sometimes makes more sense and sometimes makes less, depending on who exactly it is. But you can expect to be able to find us one way or another if you want to fight or just watch stream next Monday for Street Fighter 5, and next Tuesday for Unclear. It's likely, but a little less possible. A little less. There's more of a chance that there will not be Unclear than usual, and I was as unclear as possible about that. Of course, next week's Thursday will almost certainly be another SixyTimes Lounge, if you are primarily a DoA fan, so you can join us for that then. next week we'll probably be seeing more people for various reasons. Mainly by then we may have the free weekend, and possibly if it goes past weekend, characters, or just people who are more aware of it. The couple of people who would tend to come in. This lounge is limited somewhat by the fact that we don't take players above a certain level, so that's why you don't see this. But in this case, this has come to the end of the stream for tonight. Find our bots at 2-mk.org. But this has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.